seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay up. Oh my God! 30, no 10, touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! Ah! What a miracle finish!
Hey everybody, and welcome to the State of Purple podcast. Back after a long holiday break. Hopefully you had a great opportunity to catch up with the family, take some time off work, and enjoy Vikings football. Maybe not so much. Jack Day, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing well. It was a good, much-needed couple weeks off, but I'm looking forward to as much as I can, kind of diving into that disaster that we saw on Sunday night and kind of what the future holds for this football team.
Yeah, no doubt. Unfortunately, the team is eliminated from the playoffs officially now. So we turn the page a little bit. There's still 1 week left in this new 17-week, 18-week, 17-game schedule, whatever you want to call it. We'll talk about that a little bit. But for now, we're kind of jumping into some of the questions that everyone's pondering right now. The future of the team, the future of the head coach, the future of the quarterback. These are the things that we are left to talk about at this point in the season because they got whooped on Sunday night. So maybe that's a good spot to start, Jack. The Sunday night game, the Green Bay Packers 37 and the Minnesota Vikings 10. It was a complete and utter stinker. So far to this point in the season, Jack, this team was tying records, I think, for the most one-score games, having all these opportunities. We were talking about how they were like a chameleon team, right? This team that they play good against good teams and bad against bad teams. Now, there's some factors that went into the game on Sunday night and maybe why they didn't play quite as well, but they played bad against a good team and got their butts kicked.
Yeah, looking back on my short life as being a Vikings fan, I can't remember the last time where even when the Vikings are kind of out of the fight, it seems like they still pull me in. And the second half of that Green Bay game, I was very, very close to just turning my TV off and walking away from it. Especially, I was expecting, and I don't know where you were at on this, I was kind of excited to gauge how your thought process was on this. I thought in the second half we were going to see Kellen Mond. I didn't see a reason for not playing Kellen Mond. I know they kind of said, this is kind of where it got turned into more of a disaster in my eyes, is they didn't want to stunt the development of their rookie quarterback that they took right at the top of the third round. Yet in Mike Zimmer's press conference after the game, it almost seemed like what he said is going to get in the head of that rookie quarterback by saying, hey, I see this kid enough during practice. It's like there's something messed up along the process, whether that was, hey, this quarterback, Kellen Mond, he's not what we thought he was, or B, this coaching staff is not bringing the quarterback along properly. And I think that's something that you can make the argument that we really haven't seen that as Vikings fans, where they draft a young quarterback and kind of develop him, groom him into a starting caliber quarterback. Instead, they do these 1, 2, 3, 4-year rentals on already somewhat proven veteran quarterbacks. And I think we're starting to get to the point where Rob Brzezinski, he's a cap wizard, but kicking the can down the road can only last so long. And I think I think you and I are kind of in a similar mindset of where we see the direction of this football team going. And it just feels like, I know we had this conversation too, but it feels like some sort of, it doesn't have to be a full rebuild, but there has to be some sort of rebuild for this football team. And I don't know where you start with that. There's the three talking points in Rick Spielman, Kirk Cousins, Mike Zimmer that we're going to get into, but it's going to be an extremely interesting offseason. So I think Vikings fans need to buckle up.
Yeah, no, there's a lot that goes into that. We heard different stories really with the Kellen Mond situation. We heard a lot of speculation more so leading up to the game that he wasn't ready. He hasn't come along, whether that's his fault or the coach's fault, that he wasn't ready to be put into that situation. Then we saw him come into the game for one series, but we found out that it was because Sean Mannion's hand was injured. And it wasn't because it was just out of hand and we were going to test it and see how he was doing and what he could do into this situation. And then after, there was also this thought that Sean Mannion gave the Vikings the best chance to win, right? You didn't have to change the offense up. Sean Mannion basically is Kirk Cousins, a relatively immobile, strong arm quarterback that is familiar with the offense and can run the offense. It didn't look like that. I mean, I guess the immobile part, that 11-yard run he had or whatever, where he looked like an elephant running down the field, was interesting. But there's a bunch of different narratives to this decision there, all of them disappointing, right? I mean, if Sean Mannion, what we saw of Sean Mannion could give you a better opportunity, mind you, he was like 1 day off of COVID activation too. So it wasn't like this is a super healthy, super, ready and prepared Sean Mannion. This is a guy who's been away from the team for a couple weeks or 10 days or whatever the mandate was at the time. He probably, hasn't been working out or doing everything that he could. He may have some respiratory issues. Who knows what his symptoms were with COVID? But that was a better option than putting in your third-round quarterback, who sometimes the mentality is that you get a different quarterback in there. They prepare for Kirk Cousins, and then all of a sudden you pull the string and put a mobile quarterback in there. They used to do this with Joe Webb. They didn't do this, but this happened with Joe Webb, with Christian Ponder. Ponder was the stoic pocket quarterback. He gets injured. Joe Webb comes in and runs all over the field and ends up winning a game because they didn't prepare for that running quarterback. That could have been an option there. Whatever it was, it doesn't really matter. The defense didn't show up. The offense didn't show up. Special teams didn't show up. Nobody showed up. It was miserable to watch. It was probably more miserable to be there and to play in. Packers clinch, Vikings eliminated. Worst case scenario across the board. Our rivals are cheering. We're devastated. We knew it was coming, but we're bummed here. It brings us to this point, Jack, where now there's a week left in the season, a game against the Bears that doesn't really matter. I just saw a report that as like an hour ago that they plan to play all their starters, the Vikings. What's the point in that? I mean, it's at this point, I would rather, I don't know what your feelings are, I would rather have them lose and get a better draft pick.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And on top of that, I'd want to see where the development is at with this 2021 draft class. We talked about it early in the season, and I wasn't worried about it back then. We were talking about, hey, none of the rookies are playing. That was fine because Mike Zimmer brought in an overhaul of 1-year free agents on his defense. I was fine with it back then. At the point of the season that they're currently in, I see no reason why the Vikings don't have Kellen Mond, another name that's going to has been a talking point all over Vikings Twitter. Wyatt Davis, Chaz Surratt, Cam Bynum, Amir Smith-Marset. Get some of these young guys, Patrick Jones II, start them all. Why not? I understand there's the argument where it's like, well, why would Mike Zimmer do that? Why? He doesn't care about seeing where these guys are at during live game action if he believes that he is going to lose his job at the end of the season. So he's like, well, I'm still going to run out the starters. We've seen that in Mike Zimmer's tenure. We saw a Mackenzie Alexander get hurt in a Week 17 game when they clinched a playoff spot. And that was kind of – I know it's kind of a weird situation to bring that up now because Mackenzie Alexander ended up coming back to this team, but he was ticked off because he got hurt and he wasn't able to play in the playoffs that season. So it just – I don't understand the purpose of this. If for some reason you see Justin Jefferson go down with a torn ACL and that makes him miss any time in 2022 – that's a bad coaching decision, whether you're fired at the end of the season or you're coming back next year in 2022 because you don't have your superstar to start the season. So it doesn't make any sense to me. I am with you. I'd rather somehow sneak into a top 10 draft pick if that's possible. I don't really know. I think they sit at 12 right now, if I'm remembering correctly, but I just don't understand. And there's really no reason in playing any of the starters, in my opinion.
No, and the Bears are going to do the same thing, right? The Bears they don't have a first round pick. I think they traded it away for the Fields deal, but at the same time, you're still battling a division opponent, and you have that draft pick through the entirety of the draft. So the Bears, they want to see what they have in Fields, but they're not competing for anything outside of draft positioning. The Vikings aren't competing for anything out of draft positioning. There's a lot of questions on whether or not Zimmer will be here, Spielman will be here, Cousins will be here. That all goes into the future as well. We'll get to that in a couple of minutes coming up here, Jack. But at the same time, we don't know if Cousins will be healthy, right? Unless I've been away from the computer for a little bit today, but unless in the last hour something has come out on whether he's off the COVID list or symptom free or whatever that is. I know they changed the rules so you can get back a lot quicker, but that's under certain circumstances and with no symptoms and with these negative tests and all these factors that you have to fulfill. We don't know if that's going to be the case. So it very well may be. We've already seen the last of Cousins for this season, potentially the last of Cousins for his career here in Minnesota. that's another narrative, Jack. Let's turn the page there right now. Actually, use that as our transition point as we look into the future a little bit here, because there's not a lot to talk about for next week. I mean, it's the Bears. No one's interested in what they're doing. No one's interested in what we're doing. It literally is a fight for a better draft pick. Jack, the thought. I don't know that there were any official reports, but the thought popped up again this week about trading Kirk Cousins. A $35 million guaranteed contract for next year on the books. So it's a hefty price tag to either keep or a hefty price tag to trade away. People are speculating some teams. There's some opportunities and some options out there. What are your thoughts on the future of Kirk Cousins? A, do you think that they should keep him? B, do you think that they will keep him? And what's it going to take in return for the Vikings to make this worthwhile?
I think to answer the B question, I think we're going to have to get to the next point of this question, whether or not Mike Zimmer returns in 2022, because if there's a new regime that comes in and takes over, I think they're more likely to move on from Kirk Cousins unless they get a Shanahan or someone that is in love with the style of play that Kirk Cousins has. But I personally think, and I'm going to start this out by saying this, go back and watch some of the previous episodes and listen to the previous episodes of this show, because I've stuck up for Kirk Cousins. I will sit here. I will continue to pound my fist on the table for Kirk Cousins. And I will say, I think he belongs obviously he belongs in the NFL. He is a top 12, top 13 quarterback in the NFL. If he is in the right circumstance, I think he can do great things in the NFL. Having said that, I don't think $45 million on this team next year is a great circumstance for Kirk Cousins.
Is it 45 or 35?
I think it's 45 and 35 guaranteed. So I think the trades that I've seen, it would allow the Vikings to get out of $35 million.
Gotcha.
So and I think some of the trades that we've seen that you're alluding to, I think one of them was to Pittsburgh, where you get a first round pick this year in return. If I'm a new regime, if I'm a new GM that comes in here and I get that offer, I get out of $35 million and I get a first round draft pick, I take that deal 10 out of 10 times. Just because I have a list of guys, this was the only notes that I wrote down here before this show. Sheldon Richardson, Mason Cole, Tyler Conklin, Rashad Hill, Nick Vigil, Xavier Woods, Mackenzie Alexander, Everson Griffin, Anthony Barr, and Patrick Peterson. All of those contracts are up, and that is a lot of guys that played meaningful football in 2021. They keep this narrative is circulating. Hey, just let's run it back and rebuild this defense up. How are you going to do that with no money? I think some sort of rebuild is needed. I will say this: I've already done a couple mock drafts this morning. If I had another first round draft pick, I think there's a lot of defensive talent in this draft class. If you can go out, Sauce Gardner was a cornerback for Cincinnati that throughout that entire Cincinnati-Alabama game, they were just raving about the guy. Bigger bodied frame. I think he could be a true shutdown cornerback one type player for the Vikings. If you can go into this draft and draft someone like that, and then there's a lot of people that are saying it's going to be a reach to take a quarterback in the first round, which I kind of agree with, but teams always reach on quarterbacks. That's just how it goes at that position. If the Vikings are able to come out of that first round with a true potential lockdown cornerback and a potential quarterback of the future, one I like is Matt Corral. I'm sure we'll talk about that down the road a little bit more. If you could do something like that, I am all hands on deck. I would love the idea of doing that, because then it really allows for you, one, you have Matt Corral or another rookie quarterback competing with Kellen Mond. I think you can go out and get some sort of veteran minimum, maybe not even veteran minimum, but I shouldn't say this because it's going to make a lot of Vikings fans go crazy, but get a quarterback like a Teddy Bridgewater, a Marcus Mariota, Gardner Minshew, someone like that can kind of bridge the gap for rookie quarterbacks, and then you can let all three of them compete in camp. And then at the end of the day, if that coach struggles and they win 1, 2, or 3 games, that 2023 quarterback class with CJ Stroud, Bryce Young out of Alabama, the quarterback class is a lot better that following year. And I want to say that. So that is where I'm at. I think that's the best way or best route to go. But it's tough because like I said, it's hard for me to say, yes, I think this team should move on from Kirk Cousins, because Kirk Cousins has had yet another very good statistical season for this team.
I saw something, and I'm going to paraphrase it and try and remember the stats, but Cousins being the first quarterback to have 2 seasons in a career with 4,000 yards passing, 30 touchdowns, and less than 10 interceptions to miss the playoffs twice. Is that about what it was?
Yep.
It's crazy. We know that he's productive. Jack, I think you hit it on the head earlier when you said that he has to be in the perfect scenario. And I just don't think that the Vikings are able to give him that perfect scenario. They don't have the pieces in place. They didn't when they brought him here. And then once they brought him here, his contract has impeded them from bringing in people to get the perfect scenario for him. And essentially that means offensive line, right? I mean, he has wide receivers. He's had decent tight ends. I know Irv Smith Jr. was supposed to be an up and coming guy this year. Didn't do it so because of the injury, but it's simply the offensive line. We mentioned that he doesn't move well. We mentioned that he's not a mobile quarterback. He needs that time in the pocket to be effective, and we've seen him do that. The numbers prove that he can be an effective quarterback. But like Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis, like Ben Roethlisberger to some extent in Pittsburgh, but his arm is falling off basically. So if that's an option there, you replace him and get him in there, and you have a strong arm quarterback with an offensive line that can protect you in a good defense, you're set, and they're going to compete. Now, it will take a perfect scenario, and I'm not convinced that there is going to be a perfect scenario. I have no idea what the Pittsburgh salary cap looks like. You take Ben off the books, I'm sure that takes a decent chunk off there, but I don't know if they can afford a $35 million contract. I don't know how much room they have with the new salary cap that comes up to 208, I think it is, or above 200. You have to have that factor in, and I really think that there are a couple teams that are going to explore this opportunity and do some research on it, but it's going to be a deterring factor, and you're not going to get these large package deals back in return for Kirk Cousins because someone has to take his contract. In the NBA, you hear about this a lot more often when some team's going to pay this part of the contract and it has to be offsetting, and you got to do this and have that all line up. That factors into the NFL as well, but it comes in you're not going to get a first and a third for Kirk because of the $35 million. You might just get the first, right? You're not going to get multiple seconds. You're not going to get these packages, because a team has to take on that contract as well. That $35 million factors in negatively against the Minnesota Vikings. So it has to be a perfect scenario, has to be an opportunity where a team they think they're a quarterback away. We've been there. We did that with Kirk. We thought we were a quarterback away, then that didn't work. We thought we were a quarterback away with Favre. So we've seen teams do it because we've done it here. It is something that teams do. Now, I think it should happen for, again, whether it happens this year or the year after that, and they find a way to get a more favorable situation. Kirk is not the quarterback of this future for the Vikings anymore because they haven't been able to build the future around him. They haven't been able to build a core around him because they just haven't had the money to do so or haven't made the right picks to do so. Another conversation for a future episode. But I think that we're in agreement here that Kirk is not the quarterback of the future. If they can get out from under it, they get out from under it next year and start that process right away. You threw out some scenarios, bringing in a veteran and drafting another guy and letting Mond, the rookie, and the veteran fight it out. Great opportunity. But things have to work out first. And I'm just not convinced that they have the ability to do that. If Kirk is here next year, Jack, this then is another one of those middle of the road teams. You got Dalvin, you got Kirk, you got Justin, you got Thielen. You have guys that you can move the ball, you can put points on the board. You'll get Irv Smith back. The offensive line is still in shambles. The defense is a gigantic question mark. Anthony Barr, you mentioned, is one of those free agents, or the guys that they're going to try and maybe get out of a contract because it's not favorable for the team. All the free agents, is there a free agent cornerback right now? Or I'm sorry, is there anybody that has had decent play outside of Dantzler, I guess, that is going to be a cornerback returning, or let's call starting cornerbacks returning this year for next year? I don't think there is anybody outside.
No, and on top of it, they lost a lot of depth now too. I think Breeland was a 1-year deal, but the Mike Hughes trade in this summer as well. I'm not saying Mike Hughes has been a superstar, but the depth is just so limited, and I think Kirk Cousins' contract holds that back. If you're sitting here and telling me that Kirk Cousins is going to be the quarterback next season, I think that further kicks the can down the road, because I think if that happens, there's no real way, in my opinion, where they can make that work next year without extending Kirk Cousins to get some of that money down the road. And I will admit, I'll say this, there's people on.
Nobody wants that, right?
No, I don't think so. I personally don't want. There are people out there that want Kirk Cousins to be extended because he has been a good quarterback, but I'm on the other end of the spectrum, and I'll say this, because there's people that say, hey, if you don't want Kirk Cousins, look what happened with Sean Mannion. Look how ugly this can get. What if it's a Christian Ponder that comes in here and the team goes 3-14 or whatever it is? That might happen. That might be the case, but if that is the case, there's no more mediocrity in this franchise, and they actually might have a legit chance at a true quarterback of the future, something this team really hasn't had a chance at in my lifetime, and that excites me. I know there's a chance of it turning ugly and this not being pretty for a couple of years, but I think that's a risk that I'm willing to take, because what if the Vikings draft a quarterback and he turns into a Joe Burrow, a Justin Herbert, a Josh Allen, a Patrick Mahomes? If that happens, this franchise is set up for the next decade, next 15 years. And I don't think there's been a time in my lifetime where we've had that continuity at the quarterback position. And I think that excites me. And I know there's risks with doing that, but they're risks that I think this fan base should be willing to take.
There's another part of that equation, Jack, and we'll transition to our next point. On that note, Rick Spielman doesn't have a great track record of drafting quarterbacks and of drafting high draft picks in general. I mean, he's had some success. We've gone over this in essence for the last handful of years. The good things he's done, the bad things he's done. At the end of the day, the quarterback situation is what it is because of his decision making, his lack of drafting a young guy to come in and fill it in. Nobody wants to have to go spend a lot of money on a free agent quarterback and have that be the way that you compete. It really doesn't work that way often. There are opportunities where you do that, but what you want is to have a inexpensive young quarterback like the Russell Wilsons, like Patrick Mahomes before he got paid. You have these young quarterbacks that come in, they accelerate and rise to the rankings quickly. And I know I just named two of the all-time great quarterbacks. I'm not fooling anybody there, but that's what you're looking for. A quarterback who can compete on a rookie deal and you can pay to build the team around them. When you do it the other way, it oftentimes doesn't work unless you have a superstar Hall of Fame caliber, Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes kind of player. Just doesn't work that way. So Rick Spielman, do we trust that he can do that? Is that a part of the equation that you want in this? We've talked a lot about drafting a quarterback next year, trading Kirk Cousins, however that looks like. Do you want Rick Spielman, not you, Jack, but generally speaking, do we want Rick Spielman to be the one who's going to draft that quarterback? Do we trust him? Lots of talk about Spielman and Zimmer. Are they tied together? Is one of them safer than the other one? Is it possible for one to stay and one to go? We've talked about this, Jack, but it's been a couple months now. Your thoughts on do they both go, Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, or if one stays, which one is the one that's going to stay?
I think our best chances at drafting a franchise quarterback is keeping Rick Spielman and letting him draft that quarterback in the second round. That's partially a joke because if you go back and you look at his second round, it's crazy. The second round draft picks that he's had, the ones in recent memory, Eric Kendricks, Delvin Cook, Irv Smith Jr., he hits Ezra Cleveland. He's hit on a lot of second round picks, but we've had some struggles in the first round.
But the one last year was great.
Yeah, and Justin Jefferson obviously was kind of is that the first? I guess they hit on Stephon Diggs, but that's a fifth round pick. But it just feels like, in my opinion, it just feels like it would be harder to go out and find a GM that's going to be the caliber of what Rick Spielman brings. I think, in my opinion, if you had to get rid of one or the other between Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman, I think Mike Zimmer is the one that should be out the door, just because it scares me. Because if you get a new GM, it's a whole new philosophy, which might be fine. There's people out there that want a whole new philosophy within that front office. So maybe I'm wrong in saying that. Maybe they need to completely start from scratch and kind of rebuild this franchise up from the ground up. And that worries me slightly. I know I don't really know who's out there for GMs. I know Louis Riddick, the ESPN analyst, had his name kind of thrown in the hat. A lot of people talk about him potentially taking over a team that's going to fire their GM. I have a friend who's a Chicago Bears fan who absolutely wants him to take over their GM role, but I don't know. That's where it starts to get a little bit more murky for me, because it does scare me. But at the end of the day, if the Wilf ownership feels like it's run its course and they need to kind of just start over, I could get behind that. I wouldn't be opposed to it. But if I had to pick one of the two to keep, I think Rick Spielman is the one that I would keep around.
That's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of Vikings fans. But I think I would agree with you in the sense that I think it's twofold with Mike Zimmer. First and maybe foremost, I don't think he wants to do this anymore. I don't think he's having fun. I think it feels like torture to him. The scrutiny, the pressure that comes with it, he's He's been able to handle it when he's had protection and he's been there, but and had success. But when it's not there, it seems to be weighing on him. Maybe his priorities have changed. We talked about his family has shifted. He's got grandkids. He's got a significant other that he wants to spend time with. He's got his ranch. He's got his life that he maybe wants to live. And he spent a lot of time in football. He's not one of these young coaches that is 10, 15 years and he's at the point where he's at now. He spent a lot of time moving up the ranks as coordinators on multiple different teams before becoming a head coach. Remember, he was one of the older head coaches to get his first crack at being a head coach. Maybe life has just moved on for him and he's not interested in it or needs a break and needs a refresh, whatever it is there. And at the same time, I also think that there's something that it may go hand in hand. I think he's been a little stubborn. I think he's been a little stubborn with his adapting on defense. If it doesn't fit his way, we talk about coaches who come in and adapt a defensive scheme based on the players they have, and coaches who come in and say, "This is my scheme, you will run it, no matter who you are." Zimmer is a little bit more of the latter there, where it's like, this is what we do here. You need to come in if you're good at this or not. This is what we do here, and you need to play it the way we want. And that goes into the offense too. Even as recently as last week, Mike Zimmer was mentioning at halftime, I think, that they're not running the football enough. I get it. Dalvin Cook is a superstar. Like, you want to get him the ball, but you're down by 20 points at that point. You need to pass the football. You can't run the football on an offensive line that isn't opening up holes with a running back who isn't finding the holes and expect to get back into this game. So I think there's a little bit of stubbornness too that is just not befitting for this team anymore as well. So if one had to go, I do think that it would be Zimmer over Spielman. I do think that my vote would be for a complete rehaul. I think we just need something new. Spielman's been here for a long time. He's been through multiple regimes as coaches. He's had a long opportunity to do it, and he's had success. I'm not knocking him, but I feel like there is a new version of general managers out there, a new version that focuses on some different things, whether it's the analytics, whether it's the new age gameplay and game management, whatever you want to call it. I think that we need to keep up with the times, and I don't know if we're ready to do that. And maybe Rick can adapt, and maybe Zimmer's holding him back from that, and maybe they're just not a good pair. That might be the case there too. But I do think that I maybe would welcome a change. I'm not going to go out there and fight for it, but I think that if like you said, if one goes, it's Zimmer. If they both go, so be it. Start over. Let's get some fresh look in here real quick. Jack. Trying to rack my brain real quick. I think we got through everything that we were going to get through today. We'll be back next week again to give a complete season recap, really looking back at what went wrong, where it went wrong, once we have a final record, final standings, and all these things for this team, because there's one more game left. We're talking like it's like the body's already dead, but it just feels like it. So, excuse me. You can find old episodes of the State of Purple podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And each week we will record these live and stream them live. Lots of people taking part in today's conversation, joining in the chat. We appreciate it. AJ Green, Viking Jerome, Brandon Lewis. Who else we got here? Boomer Hadouken. A bunch of people were in the chat here, partaking in this conversation and kind of steering it in some sense. So thank you for doing that as well. Jack, you can follow him on Twitter at Jack_H_day. It's been a while. I forgot your Twitter handle for a second. And you can follow his writing at kfan.com. You can find me on Twitter at AJKFAN. And until next week, we will see you next time on the State of Purple podcast. And of course, I wasn't prepared. I got to get my transitions going here. I haven't been working for like 2 weeks, Jack, and man, do I feel it. I'm a little rusty today with everything. So we're going to pretend that didn't happen. Those of you here, I might even edit it out of the podcast. We'll see. So you're lucky you get to see it here. Jack, have a good one, man.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop, steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.